Hey everyone, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
I'm feeling shooty today. I'm gonna shoot some stuff.
Oh my goodness. So yes, let's dive right into it, sir. So continue our beginning guides and helping you learn how to play Warhammer the Old World. We're going to move into the shooting phase. So let's load it up, sir.
Aha. That requires me to do work.
Yes. Aha. The shooting phase. So let's walk it through it. So high level, what are the sub phases of the shooting phase?
Well, first, I'm gonna pick one of my units, and then I'm gonna
Oh,
choose and declare a target. Now, what's funny about the shooting phase here, it's actually different than the other phases because you kind of do all of these steps in a row, but for one unit at a time, and then you go to next unit, then the next unit. Now, that's totally different than the other phases because they all have these sub phases that are totally and kind of irreparably separate, and they can't go back. This one, no. You That's exactly what you do. So basically, one at a time, pick a unit, then you choose what you don't want to shoot at, then you roll a hit, then you roll a wound, and then you remove some guys, and then you start over again and do all four of these again for the next unit. Now, this makes sense on the table when you play, but I just want to point out that it does kind of break the flow of what the other sub phases were, where they were kind of everyone does phase one, everyone does phase two, yada yada. Now, one thing
yep,
this lets you
and
do,
it is different
yeah,
because back to the risk versus reward. If this was like the other phases, like charging, well, I declare all my charges at first. So I don't know what Evan's going to do for his charge reactions until I've declared them all. I have that risk versus reward. That's not the case in the shooting phase. It's not I declare all my shots against everybody units and hey, maybe I poured way too many shots into this unit when I didn't need to do that, or they fled from something. So it is different, as Evan said, than the other phases. The attacker actually does have the advantage in the shooting phase of information in advance because they get to see the resolution of their shooting attack through completion before they then declare and resolve the next shooting attack. So this is more advantageous to the attacker. There is less risk versus reward, but quite frankly, when you're playing the game, you see because you do need to resolve it, it's just way easier to work through the process by resolving one shooting at a time. It'd be really difficult to do it the other way around.
yeah. So um, basically, the other thing, like you said, one of the things this lets you do is that as the shooter, you then have a lot of power. So you get to pick, I want to shoot this unit first, and maybe they'll finish you off, and then maybe if not, I have my second unit also shoot at you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had a great example of this. I was playing against Leo, who's one of our local Skaven players, and he has 3 units of 12 gutter runners, and each unit gets to fire 2 shots with each guy, so that's 24 shots, and they all have poison. That
Oh
means
yeah.
he has uh, 72 poison shots a turn. Now, my dragon had 2 wounds
Ooh.
left. So what he did was he fixed his first unit and says, I'm going to shoot at the dragon. We see what they do. Now, the first unit didn't do any wounds. So he says, okay, now the second unit will shoot at the dragon. And the second unit finished it off. So that's how he knew that he didn't need to use the third unit to also shoot at the dragon, right? And so because we did this one at a time, you have that advantage. So first you pick the unit and declare your target. Then you just roll to hit. So what's skipped here is that you have to figure out what you need to roll to hit. There's often modifiers that make it harder to hit.
Yep.
And then you have to
Yep.
roll to wound. So this is based on the strength of your weapon versus the toughness of your enemy. Unless if you use poison, which you just skip this step. They get to make their armor saves against their attacks. And then finally, based on what you did, you remove models. And then if they take enough wounds of damage, then they take a panic test. Right?
Yep. All right.
Okay.
So let's dive into the details of it.
So first of all, we have to say who gets to shoot. So if a unit charges, you don't get to shoot. We already talked about this during the movement phase, but when you have a unit of archers, they have to choose between charging or shooting. And if they make a charge and they fail, they don't get to then just shoot. That's not a thing.
To be clear, it's not just archers. That could also be your wizard.
Yeah,
If your wizard is charging in, that means he's not casting a fireball. Right?
right.
So there are other types of shooting besides just an archer.
And I really commonly run my high magic wizard in a bunch of white lions, so I have to either pick between charging with like my Fury of Cain and then not casting my shooting spells, or
Yep.
not charging and using like Walk Between Worlds, and then I get to shoot my spell. So I don't get to do all of my things in the same turn. I'll have to pick, and if I don't make the charge, then I'm just screwed, right?
Womp womp.
So if you're engaged in combat, you don't get to shoot. So this is something people probably think about a lot when they have like an Iron Demon or a Steam Tank, and they're like, why don't I get to just shoot them with my Steam Gun? Because you're in combat. So you just don't.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a unit of archers, they're too busy using their swords to try to not die, and so they can't just pull out their bows and shoot arrows. And similarly, if you have a dragon, you can't use your breath weapon while you're in combat. Now, a lot of people would love to be able to do that. but that'd be too strong, I think.
Yep.
And you can't shoot if you're fleeing. So you can shoot if you rallied this turn, but you can't shoot
Hmm.
if you are currently still fleeing. So those guys are just busy running away.
Yep.
So next you have to check line of sight. So you have to be able to
Hmm.
actually draw line of sight with at least one of the models in the unit to the target to be able to shoot at them. And then you look at line of sight from individual models. Now this can take some amount of time until you get used to it. It's really useful to have like there's these laser pointer tools that kind of draw a straight line on the table. So you use it to say, okay, is this guy see a straight clear line to your unit or not? And technically the way that the getting cover works, you need to know whether they can see all of the models in the unit or how many
Hmm.
of them they can see. So every individual model, how many can the enemy see? That's crazy, right?
Yeah, and that's the biggest difference than some other tabletop games is you're not checking line of sight unit to unit. It's individual model to the unit,
Yeah,
right? So if I have a line of 10 archers, and half of Evan's unit, right, might be obscure. A piece of terrain might be obscuring half of my unit from seeing Evan's unit, right? Yeah, I have to check each individual model, which models can shoot or obscured and such. So that is the biggest difference in this game versus other tabletop games. Model
right.
to unit.
And this gets incredibly pedantic when you have units of skirmishers that are like a bunch of archers and there's like 20 of them in one unit because all of the skirmishing models
Well,
technically
let's not
block
dive
line
into
of sight.
skirmishing. We'll do that in another video.
Anyway, so you also have to check the range of all the individual models. So if you're trying to do a stand and shoot, you don't have to do it for that. But if you're doing any other kind of shooting, you just have to figure out like are they in range. Now, if you're firing like bows at like your max range, what you'll often see is then some of your models that have like volley fire or something, they won't be in range. So you'll have a
Yeah.
natural kind of decrease in damage when you're kind of at that max range threshold because some of the guys just won't be able to actually shoot that far, and so you won't have as many
Hmm.
shots.
Yep.
So then, once you finally figured out that yes, I can actually shoot at you, I then pick one of the viable targets, and then I will shoot at that specific target. You then count up the shots. So each, by default, every shooting weapon is just one attack. So oftentimes you'll have like a chaos lord or a elf prince who has 4 attacks in combat. Well, if he
Hmm.
has a bow, he gets one shot, unless he has some
Yep.
kind of magic bow.
It will specifically say differently on the weapon itself that if it's a ranged weapon, if it has more than the default attack. If it doesn't say how many attacks it has, it means it has one shot, and
Exactly.
they're just being.
Also, this is just saying we can't all shoot, so you can't have your shooting split between 2 different units. So everybody has to shoot the same unit, and if some of them can't see, they just don't shoot at all.
Yep. And that again, big difference for people coming from 40K where they're used to being able to split fire in the more recent editions of the game. That is not true in Warhammer the Old World. Your unit, no matter even if you have 10 guys and only one can see, if you declare versus that target and only that one guy shoots, the rest of the 9 shots are wasted shots.
Yeah. This also means that if you have a character in a unit where he might have like a very powerful bow and the unit
Oh
has
yeah.
much weaker bows, that whole unit has to shoot at the same target. So they often, might not want to do that because those shooting weapons aren't necessarily ideal versus the same target.
Hmm. So plan ahead.
Okay, so then now you decided you want to shoot and you figured out how many guys can shoot. Now you need to roll to hit. Well, based on your ballistic skill, you have a different number you're going to hit. So on a ballistic skill 3, you start with a 4 plus to hit at the base. Now this is essentially your best case scenario. And then if you have ballistic skill 4, like my elves do, your ballistic skill start at a 3 plus. They're saying here there's fast dice. Now, in theory, you roll one at a time, but that takes way too long and it doesn't affect anything because all the shots have to go in the same unit anyway. So you might as well
Hmm.
just say, I've got 10 shots, I'm going to roll 10 dice, see how many hit, then I'll roll the woes again, how many wound, etc. But
Yep.
if there's ever any controversy, you can just roll them one at a time to just figure it out if there's kind of an edge case. In particular, this
Yep.
would matter a lot if you have, like, let's say, multi-wound 2 shots and you have several of them. So if you have, like, a unit of 5 Ushabti that have bows and they have their multi-wounds effect, you'll have to kind of resolve them one at a time to see what happens when they shoot into a bunch of ogres, for example.
Or the more common situation is I might have a unit of, let's say, 10 archers, and let's say 5 of them have no penalties to shoot Evan's unit, and the other 5, their units obscured or they're at longer range, right? And so they would have a different ballistic skill modifier, which is why I'd roll the dice pools separately. That's the most common thing. Also, keep in mind the roll to hit. for shooting is different than the roll to hit in combat, because in combat you're comparing your weapon skill to your opponent's weapon skill. That is not true when you're shooting. You're just, this is my ballistic skill, my BS, and this is what I need to roll on the dice in order to hit my target, applying any modifiers that might occur when rolling to hit.
Yeah, so if you're a total Giga Chad, like a Waywatcher or something like that, you can have a skill that's even higher than this chart. And if you do,
Mm-hmm.
you hit on a 2 plus with the first shot, but if you do miss, you get to roll again and then hit on a 6 plus if you're both skill 6, hit on a 5 plus if you're both skill 7, and the second to hit roll is never modified at all. So this means that if you're both skill 8 or something, you're going to hit on a 2 plus, like let's say you have -2 to hit, so you hit on a 4 plus after that, and then if you miss, you get to then just roll into a 4 plus again, because the second one doesn't get
Yeah.
modified.
Now, these ballistic skills are incredibly rare in the game, but you will find them in particular on like some elf characters that have exceptionally high ballistic skill. But again, very uncommon, but they can happen.
Okay, now what is very common, unless you're Tomb Kings, is to hit modifiers. So
Mm-hmm.
these are all the different scenarios on the battlefield that leave you with a harder time to hit than normal. If you have moved and you're firing, you have a -1 to hit. So, for example, if you had to rally, that counts as moving for the purposes of shooting. If you had to do a
Yep.
reform so that you could then face somebody, that counts as moving. So if you often get a -1 for that, unless you have quick fire, which ignores it. If you are firing at long range, so this means if you're shooting at over half of the weapon's range, so if you have a longbow that's 30-inch range, so if you're firing at anyone who's further than 15 inches away, you have a -1 base. Now this one is almost always active, which means that your ballistic skill is basically almost always -1 from whatever you saw before, right?
Because typically, if they're less than half range, they might be charging you. So that's
Yeah.
why this is so common.
If you're doing a stand and shoot, you get a -1 to hit, but stand and shoots don't suffer the penalty for moving and shooting because you're not, and you don't suffer for the penalty for long range because you just wait until they get to close range to fire because they're charging at you. So standing a shoot is -1, but you also don't care about the first two, so these ones will never stack with each other. And then there's cover. So there's partial cover and full cover. Now, partial cover in the rules is if you can't see every single model in the essentially the front rank that you're firing at. And that means that if even one model is obscured by something, you get a -1 to hit against the whole unit. And then full cover is if you can't see at least half of the models. So if you can basically only see a tiny bit of the models that you're firing at, you get a -2.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Almost like cover matters.
It matters a lot, and you can use your units to give your own guys cover. So if you're moving up a unit of witch elves, you can use a unit of shades in front of them just to block off the line of sight to a couple witch elves, and it's automatically light cover. Or full cover if you block off more than half from the shooting unit that's firing at them.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are other ways to get other modifiers, such as spells, skirmishers, and so forth and so on. We're not going to cover all of those right now, but keep in mind these are not the only modifiers. These are just the common modifiers that will come up very often.
Yes. And these ones are
There's
essentially
also
always
positive
active.
modifiers. It's not always negative.
Right, and these ones are assumed to essentially always be applicable unless if you have a special rule that says, no, it's not applicable for me because I'm a special little snowflake.
And they will stack. The negative modifiers and positive modifiers will stack, and then you figure out what the delta is and apply that to the roll.
Right, and because they can stack, you can end up with a 7+ to hit. So you can have a unit that's normally hitting on a 4+, but they have a -3, which means it goes from a 4 to a 5, 5 to 6, 6 to a 7. And a 7+, you can't roll a 7, obviously. So instead, you have to roll a 6 followed by a 4+ after that. And an 8+ would be a 6 followed by a 5+, and a 9+ is a 6 followed by another 6. Right?
Doesn't happen that often, but the
7+
roll
is
needing
common,
a 7 to hit,
yeah.
that can well, it depends if you're playing elves or empire, right? So pretty big difference there on how often you're going to run into that.
Okay, this one's just explaining it in detail, all the things I just said.
Yep. I don't think we need to go over that. We talked about
just
that.
talked about all that in detail. So, roll to wound. So this is the to wound chart that's for melee and for shooting and for spells. So it's just brought up here for the first time. You compare the strength to the toughness. Now, you can use this chart, but once you realize the pattern, you don't need the chart anymore. The pattern is that if you have the same strength as the target's toughness, it's a 4+ to wound. If your strength is 1 higher, it's a 3+ to wound, so a strength 4 versus a toughness 3 target. If your strength is 2 higher or more, it's a 2+. So if your strength 5 shooting, like Iron Drakes, versus a toughness 3 target, like every elf that exists, it's a 2+ to wound. Right?
Now, there are some nuances there. Keep in mind, so we started with the 4+ to hit. What does a 4+ to hit to mean? It's a 50-50 chance. You're
Right.
rolling a six-sided die, right? So 1 to 3, fail. 4, 5, 6, 4+, it means you're going to succeed. So it's 50-50 chance is the starting baseline. The example, as Evan said, if your wound strength and toughness are the same. Other nuances is you roll a 1, always fails to wound, right? Doesn't matter how tough you are. So that's keep in mind. That's not true for sixes, though, right? A 6 to wound is often you're going to wound, but you can see if you get really far down that chart, there is a point where you are not strong enough to actually wound it. And even if you rolled a 6, if you had a what's the comparison
So
there?
if the enemy's toughness is 6 higher than your strength, you are impossible to wound. So when the dwarves have the rune of adamant, which makes them toughness 10, they're
Ooh.
invulnerable to any attack that's under strength 5.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a tactic that you see a lot. If the Anvil of Doom, for example, takes the rune of adamant, then any regular unit that charges into it trying to block it up, it's invulnerable to its attacks, like a bunch of war
Yeah.
dogs or something like that. And then
Well, you'll find you'll get this down
yeah,
fast. Honestly, after you play so many games, it will be quickly. You'll just ask your opponent will just say, "All right, Evan, I'm shooting you this many attacks. Okay, my strength is this." I'll just automatically get in the habit of, okay, I'm hitting you with strength 3 or strength 4. I'll tell him and say, okay, my toughness is this or that, and go, oh, it's 1 off above or 2 off above and below, and it's just very simple. Just add 1, 2, or whatever the delta is. Move that by the die by that. So it's pretty quick
yeah.
once you get in the habit. And this is also why you're going to memorize your unit stats really quick, because you're constantly telling your opponent, I'm hitting you with this strength, or this is my toughness on the receiving end. And so you very quickly just remember what your unit stats are.
And no matter what, when you roll 1 to wound, you fail to wound.
Womp womp.
So after you have hit them and wounded them, then they make
Mm-hmm.
their armor save. So then armor save is essentially a chance for the opponent's armor to prevent them from taking damage at all. And this is because the units in essentially the old world usually have 1 wound, and so their health bar is just binary. They're either alive or they died. And so when you hit
Pretty
them
common.
with 10 arrows and then you wounded them with 5 of those arrows, they then take their armor save against the arrows and they prevent 2 of the arrows from going through, and then finally that means 3 arrows went through all the way, and then 3 models get removed. That's just an example.
Mm-hmm.
So your armor save is just a d6 compared against your armor, and then you subtract the armor piercing value. So if the enemy is wearing heavy armor, they have a 5-up armor save, for example, and then if you have an AP of 1 on your shooting, that means the 5+ will go to a 6+. So it's like giving a subtraction on their dice. So instead of having to pass on a 5 or a 6, they have to pass on just a 6. Now this often means that the enemy's armor can be totally removed from the AP of the attackers. So if you have AP3 from your Gromrel Great Axes, for example, and you're attacking units of Empire State troops who have light armor or shield, they just don't get any armor save at all because the AP3 removes their 5-up save. Once you've done
Yeah.
this for like 2 or 3 games, you can just start very easily translating in your head how many pips of armor you need, or AP you need, to remove the other person's armor entirely. Because that
And I'd
happens a
say in
lot.
this edition of the old world, while there is a little bit less armor than in previous editions for sure, it is fairly a lot of weapons have at least AP1 in the game, and it's also pretty easy for a lot of weapons to have AP2. So constantly, units with light armor and a shield or just heavy armor often will not get an armor save because they're getting hit with something that has enough piercing value, armor piercing value, to remove that save entirely. Also, keep in mind rolling a 1 still bad. It's always going to be a fail. There are some things in the game that allow you to re-roll some armor saves, but we're not going to go into those special rules right now. Same thing as for wounding, though. 1s are bad. Don't roll 1s. Always
Right.
roll 6s. Best
and,
advice
and
you'll ever get.
just essentially real fast, the armor value, essentially the every point of armor over the previous one is more valuable. So a 6 of armor save is maybe half as valuable as a 5 of armor save, which is half as valuable as a 4 of armor save, and then a 3+ armor save is twice as good as that, and then finally a 2+ armor save is amazing. So every
It's
pip of armor
uncommon.
you get is just dramatically more important because of the way the AP will remove the lowest armor saves entirely, and you'll be stuck with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then after you fail your armor save because you tripped on a banana or something, you then get your ward save if you have one. So characters often have the option of buying ward saves to help protect them, or spells will give you a ward save, and this then allows you
Mm-hmm.
to have a secondary effect. And these ones often don't get removed by, or they don't get removed by AP at all, but they often don't get removed by anything. So you'll have a bunch of arrows come through. They're all AP ones. They just go right through your armor, and you're like, oh no, what do I do? Well, now you have your ward saves to protect you, so you have another roll after that one. And then finally,
In
there's a
general,
regen
there are very
save.
few things that affect ward saves.
Yeah.
There are a few things in the game that do remove ward saves, but they're very uncommon.
Yeah, and basically those are all just bespoke special rules, like for example the Warpfire Dragon or something like that.
That's right. Mhm.
Okay, and finally, and again, it doesn't say it there, but there's also regen saves, which is yet another save after that one. So if somebody very often will have armor, ward, and regen, and you'll have to go through all of that to hurt them. And so my answer to that is use Killing Blow or Monster Slayer because it skips at least 2 of those saves.
Yeah, I think typically where you're going to find that often units will only have one of those.
Yeah.
It's possible to find some units that have an armor and ward save, such as like Chosen, Chaos Warriors, or other things like that. But again, those are still not common. They're typically very elite, or
Yeah.
they might have armor in regen. The
All undead have
typical
armor and regen.
when you'll find that's right, Undead Army will have a lot of that. That's a great example. But the triple save is typically going to be on a tooled up character. And that is actually fairly common because as players have learned, hey, it's pretty easy to die in the old world, and so if you can take 3 saves on your lord you spent 500 plus points on riding on a dragon, you're probably going to take those 3 saves if you can, and so that's where you're going to see it the most often.
Yeah, I was playing a game against this Dwarf King, and the Dwarf King takes the Rune of Smiting, where he does D6 wounds on his attacks. And I had 2 ward saves that I used to pass the first 2 attacks that came through that could have done 12 damage to me, right? And then I had to take a 5-up regen save from my regen armor against the final D6, and I did pass that as well. And then he rolled like a 5 for how many wounds. So if I didn't have that regen save, I would have lost 5 wounds to that single attack.
Mm-hmm.
So
a lot of offense.
after all of the saves are failed, you then remove the casualties. So in a regular infantry unit, like every single model will have 1. So you just however many you failed, that's how many guys get removed. And then if you lose 25% or more of your models of a unit in a single phase, or a shooting phase, you get to take a panic test. And if you fail it, you run away. So great. It does say here that if you are above essentially half unit strength from the start, you fall back in good order instead of flee. But if you're under half strength, you flee. So sometimes you can shoot units so much to death that they will just break and flee and just run away from you, and they won't even rally. It's rare.
That hurts getting shot.
Okay, and it breaks that down here. So fall back if you're over half, flee if you're under half. And then no need for hysterics means that no matter how much you get shot, you only have to take 1 panic test per turn. So if you get shot a bunch, you should take the 1 panic test, even if you get shot again.
And keep in mind, both fall back in good order and flee are both flee moves. So if you touch the table edge, that unit is gone.
Yep.
So be careful how far back you are from the opponent if he has ranged attacks. If you're hugging a table edge, you are putting yourself at risk of running away.
So here's just kind of the odds and ends. So first of all, magic missiles are basically like shooting attacks, but you don't roll to hit at all. It's just your casting roll was the roll to hit. And then if they dispel it, it doesn't hit, obviously. But if they don't dispel it, then it hits. And then you just, very often you'll roll a random number for how many hits you get. So magic missiles don't have like a set number of arrows you're going to be firing, but at the same time, they can then spike really high or low in that sense. Vortex spells are also technically counting as shooting, even though you don't hit anybody with them right away. You just kind of throw them out there, and then it actually is not until the beginning of the next player's turn that it actually gets to move, in every instance I'm aware of. You cannot shoot into close combat. So if you throw a unit into close combat, not only is it the unit that you're in combat with not shooting at you, but the unit that's now in combat can't be shot at either. So unlike in Total War, you can't just have 12 units of archers just focus down the enemy dragon while it's just busy fighting something, and they just sit there just gleefully shooting into melee, not caring. No, you can't shoot.
And like anything else in the game, there are exceptions to every rule that exists, such as a banshee screaming into combat. But in general, if your opponent has a lot of shooting, you want to get into combat because then you're going to not get shot.
I'm so mad that Skaven can't shoot into combat. I'm very mad about that.
For now, hopefully in the future, we will see them get some revisions. I am optimistic. The future for Old World is very bright, sir, and we're going to see some exciting things in the future.
So you're definitely saying that I'm going to write those revisions and publish them, and then you're going to be okay with it. Yep. Okay, we're good. All right, we're going to continue. We're going to continue. No.
Moving on, quick.
Moving on. Shooting into combat? Yes. No, we're going to skip that one. Shooting with more than one rank. So yeah, normally you can only fire with the front rank. Now this might throw some people off, but yeah, because only the guys in the front rank can see, because the guys behind them have their line of sight blocked by the guys in front. Now you do have volley fire, so basically every kind of bow can have half the models in each rank after the first get to fire, so that's cool. But if you have handgunners, just put them in one line, I guess. I don't know.
Doesn't work. There
except
is
if you're on a
one
hill.
major exception to this, right? Certainly being on hills that will allow you
Yep.
to fire with that second rank. The other thing to keep in mind that they did clarify in the FAQ for people is that if you were shooting at a large target, such as a big old dragon, everybody can see that big old dragon. They don't have to fire forward. That thing is enormous, and they're just shooting up at the big, large target. So
Yeah.
even if you have multiple ranks behind that normally couldn't shoot, you all get to fire at large targets, no problem.
Right, and I just explained volley fire here. But yeah, the large target thing really introduced the world to the concept of the poison shooting Death Star, where you just bring like 70 poison archers that are just all in one big brick, and if you're as long as you're a large target, they just all fire at you.
There's a counter to everything in Old World. You just have to be able to bring the right counter versus the right matchup.
So this is pretty obvious, but if something says it automatically hits, you don't roll to hit. Great.
Mm-hmm.
If a hit inflicts multiple wounds, you just hit into wound, and then it multiplies after the armor saves and ward saves. Now, people might get this wrong because they might think that a regen or a ward save might be like a feel no pain save from 40k, where you kind of multiply the wounds and then save them individually. You don't do that. You save. You either take the cannonball and how many wounds it does to you, or you just regen the whole cannonball. Okay.
Yeah, and that matters. That this will create more swingy results because you're rolling less dice. So, right, if that cannonball has the potential to do D3 or D6 wounds, like the attack Evan was talking about earlier, you're just going to take that one save. You pass it or fail it, or ward save, armor save plus ward save versus regen if you had all three. But if it goes through and you failed your save, then you roll how many wounds you're going to suffer. So it's after you know whether it goes through or not. So it will create more swingy results and scarier and exciting at the same time.
So there are some special cases where you can instantly remove somebody. Now, usually this is a killing blow or a monster slayer attack where you don't get to take any kinds of saves, except ward saves against them. Another example is I think there's like the Skaven Death Glow item where they like just throw a globe at you, and if you don't pass a strength test, you're just dead. But usually you would only ever throw this at a dragon who's strength 6, so they pass it 83% of the time.
Yeah, there's some other examples
Yeah.
like the Galrock has
Yeah, that's true.
it's the kill thing. So they're rare, but they do exist.
Okay. And that's it. So the shooting was
That's
way
it.
simpler than movement. That's
Woo.
makes probably
I love it. All right. As always, please do like, share, subscribe if you got to the end of this video. And Evan, any closing words?
Stay legendary.
All right. We'll see you next time.